Hello, I'm Lisa, 33 years old, and I recently went through a divorce. My relationship with Andrew, my ex-husband, started back in college. He was a sophomore, and I was a freshman. From the moment we met, I believed he was my soulmate. After graduation, we focused on our careers, carefully saving to build a comfortable life together. After 6 years of dating, we married, and soon after, we bought our first apartment. We were excited to start a family. But after several months of trying with no success, medical tests confirmed that I was unable to conceive. The news devastated me, but Andrew remained my rock, offering unconditional support. His sister-in-law also provided comfort during that difficult time. Over time, we slowly accepted the situation and even began to appreciate the flexibility and financial freedom that came without the responsibility of children. 3 years into our marriage, we decided to host Christmas since my parents were away on a cruise. Andrew's family, minus his parents, who made a quick visit before leaving on a road trip, came over. This included Andrew's brother Jacob, his wife Melissa, and their 4 children. Despite their financial struggles, Jacob and Melissa had 2 more kids after their first 2, a decision I found baffling but kept to myself. During the holiday gathering, Jacob and Melissa made an unexpected request. They asked if their family could extend their stay, turning the holiday into a week-long staycation because they couldn't afford a traditional vacation. While I sympathized with their situation, our apartment wasn't child-proof, and it was filled with fragile, valuable collectibles. The thought of hosting 4 energetic kids in such an environment made me anxious. I worried about the chaos and potential damage to the things I held dear. Reluctantly, I agreed to their stay but made it clear that they would need to take responsibility for any mishaps. Jacob promised their kids would behave, though I had my doubts. Our apartment was not equipped to handle a family of 6, and we had no extra storage space to protect my treasured items from the inevitable mayhem. However, the pressure from Melissa, Andrew, and Jacob's desperate plea made me feel like I had no choice but to say yes. Andrew wasn't happy with my hesitation. He accused me of being materialistic and cold-hearted, claiming that I didn't value family. His chilly silence after the argument only deepened the tension. I eventually apologized in an attempt to smooth things over, and Andrew reassured me that the holidays would be joyous, but that was far from reality. The kids were unruly, and Jacob and Melissa made little effort to control them. I found myself constantly supervising the chaos, which took a toll on me and further strained my relationship with Andrew. A brief respite came on Christmas Day when Andrew's parents took the kids off our hands for a few hours, but by New Year's, I was utterly drained and counting the days until they left. My exhaustion finally boiled over into an outburst far larger than intended, triggered by an incident that perfectly captured the chaos of Jacob and Melissa's stay. One afternoon, while the adults napped and I was left to manage the children, I stepped away briefly to wash my hands after changing a diaper. In that short time, the kids' curiosity drew them to a display case holding my most treasured trinkets, a situation I had dreaded from the beginning. What unfolded was a nightmare. Our TV stand, which doubled as a display for many of my cherished items, became a playground for the kids. They tossed the trinkets aside, and one of them even used a figurine to hit the TV screen, leaving it damaged. The loud noise brought me rushing back, only to find the room in complete disarray, with broken items scattered across the floor. The commotion roused everyone from their naps, and they were greeted by the sight of shattered possessions and chaos. Overwhelmed by frustration and disbelief, I reacted immediately, unable to contain my anger at the damage done. Melissa and Jacob tried to downplay the incident as childish mischief, but my patience had run thin. Words were exchanged, and in the heat of the moment, Melissa said something deeply personal, a jab at my infertility. It cut me to the core. That comment marked a turning point. I demanded that they leave, and despite Andrew siding against me, I stood firm. I had been left to handle the kids throughout their stay, and this was the final straw. I spent New Year's away from the chaos, finding refuge with my friend Karen, who provided the support I desperately needed. When I returned, Andrew and I came to an uneasy truce. I insisted that Jacob and Melissa compensate us for the damages, a point Andrew couldn't argue given the circumstances. Despite their financial struggles, I only asked for half the cost as a gesture of fairness. However, the incident left a permanent rift, particularly between Melissa and me, a divide I knew would never heal. Months later, Andrew informed me that Jacob had received a major promotion and that they would soon be moving to another state. It was a fresh start for them, But for us, it closed a painful chapter, marked by unresolved tensions and what felt like unhealed wounds. Then came an unexpected proposition from Jacob. He suggested that Melissa and the kids stay with us temporarily while he got settled in his new job. The idea immediately set off alarm bells. After the chaos of their last visit, I couldn't believe they were asking to move in. With Jacob's promotion, I saw no reason why they couldn't hire a nanny or manage on their own. I flat out refused, reminding Andrew of the disaster we had endured during the holidays. Andrew's reaction was disappointing. He accused me of being heartless, ignoring how much Melissa's cruel comments about my infertility had hurt. He wanted to revisit the conversation later, but I stood my ground. I offered to help financially or pitch in on weekends, but I was not willing to open our home to that kind of disruption again. Andrew rejected my suggestions, fixating on housing them instead, and the argument between us grew more heated. He tried emotional manipulation, even threats, but I was resolute. This issue became a major standoff in our marriage. For 2 weeks, we argued endlessly. Then, out of nowhere, Andrew dropped the subject completely. His demeanor shifted, and suddenly everything seemed back to normal, as if the issue had never existed. The abrupt change was unsettling. While I felt relief at the immediate pressure lifting, I couldn't shake the suspicion that Andrew was hiding something. The sudden silence left me uneasy, and I began to suspect that he was keeping secrets. I couldn't ignore the urge to investigate once he had fallen asleep. Despite knowing it was an invasion of privacy, my intuition compelled me to dig deeper. My initial exploration into his conversations with Jacob quickly revealed a thank you message for helping Melissa and her children, confirming my fears of hidden plans. Further digging exposed exchanges with Melissa herself, where Andrew had promised her a place in our home. Specifically, my room was to be sacrificed as a lesson for my reluctance to help. This betrayal was a heavy blow. Our rooms were sacred spaces filled with personal treasures, and mine also served as my office. The thought of losing my private sanctuary was unbearable. Though I was tempted to confront Andrew immediately, I realized that would likely backfire. Instead, I decided to strategize calmly. Knowing I had 2 weeks before Melissa's scheduled arrival, the next day, I began implementing my plan. I secured a storage unit for the furniture I had painstakingly selected and purchased for our apartment. After moving in, Andrew had expressed a desire to delay major purchases despite our substantial savings and the fact we had acquired our dream apartment. This left us living in a nearly empty space, with only the essentials and a few decorative items I had acquired on my own. Frustrated by Andrew's reluctance to furnish our home and his moodiness about the subject, I took matters into my own hands. From the sofa to the bed frame, from bookshelves to mirrors, I funded the transformation of our living space, with Andrew contributing nothing financially. Now, facing his betrayal and the impending invasion of my personal space, I was ready to act. I decided to clear out everything I had invested in, leaving only what Andrew had personally paid for, which amounted to little beyond his own room's contents. Feeling a mix of betrayal and resolve, I reached out to my best friend Karen to discuss staying with her for an extended period. The situation with Andrew had escalated. He had unilaterally decided to invite his sister-in-law and her children to live with us, despite my clear objections and their previous visit, which had caused $5,000 worth of damage. Karen, ever the supportive friend, readily agreed to let me stay with her, excited at the prospect of extended sleepovers. Her enthusiasm strengthened my resolve to follow through with my plan, removing my belongings and the furniture I had purchased for our apartment and storing them safely away. This was not just about reclaiming my possessions, it was a declaration of my independence and a step toward distancing myself from a marriage that had dismissed my feelings and well-being. The next 3 weeks were a whirlwind of activity. I quietly began moving my items out of the apartment, careful not to alert Andrew. I also initiated divorce proceedings, a painful but necessary step toward rebuilding my life. My goal was to leave the apartment as bare as possible, a stark visual representation of the void left by the absence of respect and consideration in our relationship. As the departure day approached, my anxiety surged, not only about executing my plan but also about starting over. The final act was to remove the large pieces of furniture, including our couches and bed frames, ensuring that when Melissa and her children arrived, the home would starkly reflect the consequences of Andrew's choices. On the designated day, I took a day off from work to oversee the final removal of the furniture. As the movers carried out the last of my contributions to our shared life, I reflected on the journey that led to this moment. It was more than just leaving a physical space. It was about setting boundaries and demanding respect. Andrew, caught up in his decisions, had failed to grasp the consequences until it was too late. As the movers drove away with the final pieces, I prepared to head to Karen's place with my belongings. Just as I settled into my car, my phone rang. It was Andrew, demanding that I clear out my room for Melissa and her kids. As if our previous discussions had been forgotten, he insisted this was my lesson for not wanting to help with his family. Little did he know, I had already removed not just my personal items but everything I had contributed to our home. My response echoed his own words, marking a definitive end to our shared life. Leaving the divorce papers on the kitchen island felt like the final scene in a play that had been unfolding for far too long. The kitchen, a place that once symbolized our everyday life, now served as the backdrop for the end of our shared routine. I anticipated Andrew's reaction would come in waves, and the thought brought me a bittersweet sense of closure. Upon arriving at Karen's, the warmth of her welcome sharply contrasted with the cold departure from Andrew. We immediately set about arranging my new space, trying to make it as comfortable as possible under the circumstances. Despite our efforts to stay positive and focus on the future, my thoughts kept drifting back to Andrew, wondering when he would fully grasp the magnitude of what I had done. When Andrew's calls started coming in, I initially avoided answering, extending his moment of realization. However, curiosity and a need for closure pushed me to pick up the phone. His reaction to the empty house was exactly what I had expected, but it emphasized the finality of my decision. I had taken everything I could claim as mine, leaving him to confront the consequences of his choices. This wasn't just about reclaiming physical possessions, it was about reasserting my autonomy and setting an unambiguous boundary. The road ahead would undoubtedly be difficult, but with Karen's support and my renewed determination, I felt ready to embrace a new beginning. In the aftermath of Andrew's unilateral decision to host Melissa and her children, despite my explicit objections, I found myself justifying my actions. I had furnished our home on my own, and after Andrew failed to live up to his promise of contributing, I felt justified in reclaiming what was rightfully mine. His concern about what Melissa and the children would do with the empty house fell on deaf ears. I had warned him against inviting them due to the past damages they had caused, and his pleas seemed to ignore my boundaries and the chaos they had previously brought into our lives. Andrew called me cruel, but it was his disregard for my feelings and the trouble caused by his sister-in-law and her children that had crossed the line. My suggestion that he could stay with them instead was dismissed, prompting me to take decisive action. Despite his attempts to downplay the situation, I stood my ground, reminding him that everything I took was bought with my money and that the divorce papers awaited his signature. After our conversation, Andrew's persistent calls became a background noise as I focused on the comfort and support Karen provided. The burden of the situation lifted, and I felt confident facing any potential legal battles. Thanks to our prenuptial agreement and the clear ownership of the items I had removed, Melissa's frantic messages revealed the immediate impact of my actions. They had to return to her home, disrupting their plans and upsetting the children. Andrew's situation, now confined to a couch at Melissa's place due to the absence of a bed at our former home, was an ironic twist that Melissa thought I should regret. Her accusations fell short as her attempts to shift responsibility back onto us failed. Months have passed, and my life has improved significantly. Living with Karen has been a joyful experience, to the point where we're considering making it a permanent arrangement. Through it all, I've learned the importance of standing firm in my decisions and the peace that comes from removing oneself from toxic situations. Looking back, I view this chapter as a closed book, one that ended with me finding a happier, more fulfilling path.